We recently spent some time in a Saneta TV or House of Consciousness live chat debate between a comedian known as Reggie and others, and a comment was made that we, the Ministry of the Real Truth, when we presented the facts about the differences between the Cush descendants, the descendants of Noah, Cush, i.e. the Cushites from the Near East or Levant, with the latter descendants of Abraham that went into Africa, merged with a darker tribe or whoever there, intermarried, and then had descendants known as the Cushites with a K. Cush is basically the name of the tribe. Ites is referring to the people's, the descendants, after that interaction. So there is a difference there. People keep saying the Cushites with the C and the Cushites in Africa with a C as one people, one and the same, when they're actually not. If you look at the biblical Genesis genealogy list, the lineage list of Noah's sons' descendants, you will see there is a vast difference. If Noah and his people stepped out of the ark, Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their 3 wives, and they were European or Caucasian or white, if it was indicated by the scriptures, where's the proof that they were? Where's the proof that they weren't? Okay? It doesn't say they were African. Okay? Or dark, or black. Okay? If you want to have a look, check it out. To see that we're not trying to pull the wool over your eyes, we're trying to expose to you or reveal to you the actual truth of what the real, the ancient, original, very old Tav Asherit Brita in the Aramaic, from the sacred scribal language spoken by God to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and by the men at the Tower of Babel, spoke as a sacred scribal language of God that he spoke, or the old tongue. Translated into the nearest English equivalent by a native-born Aramaic-speaking translator from Bet Naran, Mesopotamia in Syria. So he should know what he's talking about, and he's been translating those Old Testament Tav Asherit or Aramaic manuscripts dated at around 800 BCE, because they're hand copied by scribes and monks in Urhaya, in Arabic Urfa or Edessa, now modern Turkey, around 800 BCE. Yeah. And they're probably held, contained in the original ancient, very old Apostolic Orthodox Church of the East. So, this person said that we were very Eurocentric with that answer. We were like, no, okay. And we got timed out unfairly for it, right? And we couldn't get back in. We kept on getting timed up because we're using this person's name. So obviously they got offended. They might have been a mod or moderator and kept timing us out. So we removed their name eventually and left the rest of the message. And everything was alright after that. Possibly because we, quote, offended them, unquote, by stepping on their ego and exposing them to everybody else in the chat that they were actually wrong, that they couldn't see this difference because they have a motive or an agenda. We want to push everything Pan-African. Okay, nothing else matters. Ours is the truth. Yours isn't. We have these hidden propagandic strategies, agendas, motives for doing that. Okay, so we are definitely not Euro-centered. We look at both sides of a coin, because obviously a coin has 2 sides, doesn't it? Okay, it doesn't have one. Or we look at both sides of the story, okay, told by an ancient, from an ancient civilization, and another one, right? We compare them, and then we look at the experts. This guy is saying that guy is saying that. No, which one is correct, which one isn't, and we expose them. So we're looking at this particular book, to verify that we're not just Eurocentric, okay? We're looking at this book, the deluxe edition of the works of George Rawlinson, Egyptologist, M.A., so he's highly qualified in his day. A History of Ancient Egypt, Volume 1. And maybe there's 4 volumes, maps, diagrams and illustrations in all. Preface. The work here offered to the public, conceived and commenced in the year 1876, was designed to supply what seemed a crying need of English literature, an account of ancient Egypt, combining its antiquities with its history, addressed partly to the eye and presenting to the reader within a reasonable compass the chief points of Egyptian life, manners, customs, art, science, literature, religion, together with a tolerably full statement of the general course of historical events, whereof Egypt was the scene, from the foundation of the monarchy to the loss of independence. So people got to understand that there is a lot of Euro Egyptologists, and people say, oh, because they're Euro, they're fake, they're liars, all that sort of stuff. But at that time, that century, those years, there wasn't many black Egyptologists, right, doing this sort of thing. If someone was at a university, had the qualifications, etc., maybe a professor, and he happened to be black, African black, or US Negro, then the faculty would give him a hard time, and he'd probably get expelled from it, expunged, right, kicked out, in order to stop him from revealing that to African or Negro peoples, right, students. That's what we found through our own personal research. There were some professors that was done to them. But there are a few Pan-African style scholars, theologians, experts, etc. out there. But there weren't as many, or near none, in the times of people like Rawlinson, William A. Breasted, Wallace Budge, and so forth that we found. Existing English histories of ancient Egypt were either slight and scantily illustrated, like those of Canon Trevor and Dr. Birch, or wanting in illustrations altogether, like Mr. Kenrick's, or not confined to the period which seemed to deserve special attention, like the, quote, Egypt, unquote, of Mr. Samuel Sharp. Accordingly, the present writer, Rawlinson, having become aware that no history of Egypt on a large scale was contemplated by Dr. Birch, designed in 1876 the work, now published this particular book in these volumes, regarding it in part as necessary to round off and complete his other principal labours in the historical field, in part as calculated to fill up a gap which it was important to fill up in the historical literature of his country. Since his intention was announced and the sheets of his first volume to some extent printed off, English literature has been enriched by 2 most important publications on the subject of Egypt. Dr. Birch's excellent edition of Wilkinson's Manners and Customs of the Ancient Egyptians, and the translation of Dr. Bruchke, and it's in German, Geschichte Egyptians. You haven't used German for a long time. Made by the late Mr. Danby Seymour and Mr. Philip Smith. Had these works existed in the year 1876, or had he known that they were forthcoming, the author, Rawlinson, felt that the present volumes would never have seen the light in his day. But as they were tolerably advanced when he first became aware to what rivalry his poor efforts would be subjected, it was scarcely possible for him to draw back and retract his announced intentions. Instead of so doing, he took refuge in the hope that neither of the 2 new works would altogether preoccupy the ground which he had marked out for himself, and in the pleasing persuasion that the general public, when books are published on a subject in which it feels an interest, and are devoured with avidity, has its appetite rather whetted by the process than satisfied. He trusted therefore to find in England and America a sufficient body of readers to justify his present venture and prevent his publishers from suffering any loss through him. That'd probably be profit, money, all that sort of stuff, or time even, all included. In preparing the volumes, the author has endeavoured to utilise the enormous stores of antiquarian and historical material accumulated during the last 80 years or more, and laid up in works of vast size and enormous cost, quite inaccessible to the general public. So only a select people had them. Of these, the most magnificent are the Description de l'Egypte, published by the French savants who accompanied the expedition of the great Napoleon, the Monumenti del Egitto e della Nubia of Ippolito Rossellini, sounds like an Italian, and the Denmarkerlære, it's probably a German, Professor Lepsius. M. Marriott's monuments, etc., have also furnished him with a considerable number of illustrations. Possessing only a rudimentary knowledge of the Egyptian language and writing, he has made it his aim to consult, this is Rawlinson probably, as far as possible the various translations of the Egyptian documents which have been put forth by advanced students, and to select the rendering which seemed on the internal evidence most satisfactory. He had based his general narrative to a large extent on these translations, so they were translations, and where they failed him, had endeavoured to supply their place by a careful study not only of finished histories of Egypt, like those of Lenormant, Birch and Brooks, but those of elaborate monographs upon special points, in which French and German scholars, subject to the keenest scrutiny, the entire evidence upon this or that subject or period. Such books as Derouge's, some French here by the look of it, and Chabas's Pasteurs in Egypt, and Malangue's Egyptologies, etc., etc., and Lepsius pamphlets, there's a whole list of them, are specimens of the class of works to which allusion is here made, and have been, well, it's been pointed out, right? It's pointing to, and have been the sources of the present narrative much more than any methodized histories. The author, Rawlinson, however, was far from wishing to ignore the obligations under which he lied to former, we didn't lie as in, tell some false work, it's a different term. He lies to former historians of Egypt, such as Bunsen, or maybe he relates to former historians of Egypt, such as Bunsen, Kenrick, Lenormant, Birch and Brugschke, without whose works his could certainly not have been written. He was only anxious to claim for it a distinct basis in the monographs of the best Egyptologists in the great collection of illustrations noticed, and to call attention to the fact that he had endeavoured in all cases to go behind the statements of the historiographers and to draw his own conclusions from the materials on which those statements were based. So Mr. Regi of Sarneta TV, this is where it's coming from. Okay. He's looking at the translations and these supposed claims by these historiographers to draw his own conclusions from the materials on which those statements were based. In conclusion, he would express his obligations to his engraver and artist, Mr. G. Pearson and Mr. P. Hunderley, in respect of his illustrations, to the late Colonel Howard Weiser in respect of all that he had ventured to say concerning the pyramids, to Mr. James Ferguson in respect of his remarks on the rest of Egyptian architecture, to his old friend and colleague, the late Sir Gardiner Wilkinson. Maybe that was his brother or something. If he's a Wilkinson and he's a Wilkinson, maybe that was his older parent, right, or father. In respect, or even grandfather, in respect of the entire subject of Egyptian customs and manners, to M. Wiedemann in respect of the history of the 26th dynasty, and to R. Stuart Poole, Dr. Eisenlaw, M. de Veria, and other writers on Egyptian subjects in the Dictionary of the Bible, the Review, the Archaeological Review, and the Transactions of the Society of Biblical Archaeology. He has lived to feel continually more and more how small a part of each history is due to the nominal author, and how large a share belongs to the earlier works in the field. He trusts that in the past he had never failed conspicuously in the duty of acknowledging obligations. But, however that may be, he would at any rate wish, in the present and in the future, not to be liable to the charge of such failure. To all those whose works he had used, he would hereby express himself greatly beholden. Very, very grateful to them. He would ask their pardon if he has involuntarily misrepresented them, got some things wrong, right, and made them look silly, and would crave at their hands a lenient judgment on the present volumes. Canterbury, December 31, 1880. And here's your contents page, or pages. In your list of illustrations. History of Ancient Egypt, Chapter 1. The Land. Geography of Egypt, boundaries, dimensions and character of the country, proportions of cultivable territory, dependence on the Nile, course of the Nile, the tributaries, time and cause of the inundation, chief divisions of the territory, the Nile Valley, the Delta, the Fayoum, the Eastern Desert, the Valley of the Natron Lakes, character of the adjoining countries. That's supposedly a description of what's contained in this chapter. And then here's something in Greek by Herod 2:5. Looks like Greek. The broad stretch of desert which extends from the shores of the Atlantic Ocean across Africa and Western Asia almost to the foot of the Zagros mountain range is pierced in one place only by a thin thread of verdure. A single stream issuing from the equatorial regions has stretched strength to penetrate the frightful desert of interminable scorching sand, and to bring its water safely through 2,000 miles of arid, thirsty plain in order to mingle with them with the blue waves of the Mediterranean. It is this fact which has produced Egypt. The life-giving fluid on its way through the desert spreads verdure and fertility along its course on either bank, and a strip of most productive territory is thus created, suited to attract the attention of such a being as man, and to become the home of a powerful nation. We think he's talking about the Nile there. Egypt proper is the land to which the river gave birth, and from which it took name. That's actually a Greek name, isn't it? Greek, Latin name. Egyptus, etc. Not its original name. Or the ancient's name, right? Or at any rate that land to a certain distance from the Mediterranean. But as the race settled in and this home naturally and almost necessarily exercises dominion beyond the narrow bounds of the valley, it is usual, and it is quite right, to include under the name of Egypt a certain quantity of the arid territory on either side of the Nile, and thus to give to the country an expansion considerably beyond that which it would have if we confine the name strictly to the fluvial and alluvial region. The boundaries of Egypt are by general consent: on the north the Mediterranean, on the east the Red Sea, and a line drawn from the head of the Gulf of Suez to the Wadi al-Arish, or Wadi al-Arish, or River of Egypt, of the Hebrews. On the south the first cataract, latitude 24 degrees, whatever that is, and a line drawn thence to the Red Sea at the ruins of Berenice. On the west, the great Libyan desert. The tract included within these limits is, in the main, an irregular parallelogram lying obliquely from north-northwest to south-southeast, and extending about 520 miles in this direction, with a width of about 160 miles. From the parallelogram thus formed lie out two considerable projections, both triangular, etc., etc. Within these limits, the character of the territory presents some most extreme and violent contrasts. And now a strip of he keeps describing Egypt, okay, and all that relates to it. There's a lot of detail there of what it was like, or what he's seen in his day. It was found by the scientific men who accompanied the great French expedition at the close of the last century that the land actually under cultivation amounted to no more than 1,907,757 hectares, or 4,714,543 acres. But they saw and noted that besides this cultivated territory, there were considerable tracts quite fit for crops which remained untilled. These they estimated to amount, and they give the measurements, etc., so that the total cultivable land at the time of the observations was 5,865,833 acres. Another estimates, somewhat less exact, reduced the amount to 5,189,625 acres. The difference between the cultivable area and actual And it goes on and on about that. Yeah, it's been forever on those stats. If we regard the entire era of ancient Egypt as amounting to from 95,000 to 1,000 square miles and the cultivable surface as only about 7 million of acres, we must come to the conclusion that considerably more than 7/8 of the soil, perhaps not much short of 8/9, was infertile and almost worthless. In fact, Egypt depends for her fertility almost wholly upon the Nile. The Arabian desert, which fences her in upon the right, is little less unproductive than the frightful Sahara upon the left. And had the Nile not existed, or had it taken a different course, the depressed tract through which it runs from Syene to the Mediterranean world would have been no less barren and arid than the wadis of Arabia, Petraea, or even than the Sahara itself. The land, if not the gift of the river, in the sense which Herodotus, that's the Greek historian, he wrote down all that happened at the supposed 300, but he actually said 900, something like that, because was it the Athenians left, but they still had this other group there that stood by them, so there's 900. Yeah, it's supposed to be the Greek father of history. Okay, so the land, if not the gift of the river in the sense of which Herodotus intended, is at any rate as a country created by the river, as sustained by it, and hence a necessity felt by all who have ever made Egypt the subject of their pens, or of placing the Nile in the forefront of their works and describing as fully as they could its course and its phenomena. The duty thus incumbent on every historian of ancient or modern Egypt is, at the present day and onwards, happily beset with fewer difficulties than at any former time. The long untrodden interior of Africa has been penetrated by British enterprise, and hitherto inscrutable Sphinx of Egypt has been forced to reveal her secrets. Speke and Grant, Baker, Livingstone and Gordon, remember Livingstone, he and another guy trekked across Africa. Gordon and Cameron have explored till there is little left to learn. The water system of the African interior, and the modern historian, thanks to their noble labours, can track the mighty stream of the Nile from its source to its embouchure. What's that, embouchure? Can tell the mystery of its origin, describe its course, explain its changes, and account for them, declare the causes of that fertility which it spreads around, and of that unfailing abundance whereof it boasts, paint the regions through which it flows, give, at least approximately, Jesus, go have a pause, the limits of its basin, and enumerate, in some cases describe, its tributaries. The profound ignorance of 17 centuries was succeeded about 10 years since, prior to this book probably written, or thereafter, by a time of half knowledge, of bold hypothesis, of ingenious, unproved and conflicting theories. This twilight time of speculation has gone by. The areas occupied by the basins of the Nile, the Congo and the Zambezi are tolerably nearly ascertained. The great reservoirs from which the Nile flows are known, and if any problems still remain unsolved, they are of an insignificant character and may be properly considered as mere details, interesting no doubt, but of comparatively slight importance. And it goes on more about the Nile. And then the Blue Nile. I think it was rising in the hills of Abyssinia. Yeah. The Blue Nile rises in the highlands of Abyssinian latitude, and there's a latitude to it. And there's the White Nile, or True Nile. A lot of details on that. The latitude, altitudes, all this sort of stuff. It talks about the White Nile. The White Nile, in his day, was found to be not only the main but the only true river, fed by the great equatorial lakes and supported by rainfall which continues for more than 9 months of the year from February to November. This mighty and unfailing stream carries down to the Mediterranean a vast and only slightly varying body of water, the amount of which may be estimated by considering the volume poured out into the sea, even when the Nile is lowest. Then he gives the stats and goes into more detail about the latitude and all that sort of stuff. It's basically what this chapter seems to be about. Detailed description with the latitudes of the geographical location and so forth. It's giving you this description, so you can imagine what it was like, get a feel for it probably. Okay, and these are all the animals that were probably there at the time. This looks like tree tomatoes, something like that, probably the originator of it. Looks very much like it when you cut one open, right? And it bleeds and all that sort of stuff. But it's just the juices, right? Looks very much like that. Yeah, the Great Monitor, see page 37. Looks like some sort of reptile. Or kind of looks like the forefather of a lizard. Not a lizard, a eel, right? Got the eel tail here. We know because we eat them. Yeah, without legs. Yeah, pre-runner to the eel. Okay, fruit of the Nymphada Nelumbo. Egyptian ass. Okay, it means this mule, a crossbreed between a donkey and a horse or something like that. Here's these dogs, different kinds of dogs. Hyena caught in a trap. Yeah, because hyenas are basically scavengers, aren't they? They're dog-like and wolf-like sort of thing, or mixture of whatever. And they're scabbers, aren't they? Scavengers. And they laugh. They're called laughing hyenas. It's like they're laughing at you, right? Figure 11, head of Egyptians. It's of a man. And that does not look black. Okay, like an African person. It looks more like a probably Eastern, maybe, not too sure, maybe an Indian. If it was a proper picture, we'd be able to prove that's what it is. It doesn't look like an African woman. Okay, the glossy Isis, the ibis religioso from the description, some sort of bird. Is that iris or Isis? Looks like iris. Looks like our bird that we got here, the pukeka. Yeah, Maori chicken. Yeah, and some sort of fish. Yeah. And it states here, the countries whereby ancient Egypt was bordered were three only: Ethiopia, Libya and Syria, including Palestine. Ethiopia, which lay towards the south, was a tract considerably larger than Egypt, comprising as it did not only Nubia, which flow the Atbara and Blue Nile rivers. It was also in part a region of great fertility, capable of supporting a numerous population, which inhabiting a mountain territory would naturally be brave and hardy. Egypt could not but have something to fear from this quarter, but a certain degree of security was afforded by the fact that between her frontier and the fertile portion of Ethiopia lay a desert tract, extending for above 6 degrees or more than 400 miles between the mouth of the Atbara and so on. So they fortified. It's like a massive Grand Canyon, like a pathway, right? Let's say a wide ass tunnel passage, and they built their forts and towers overlooking those areas in certain places because they were constantly invaded by Hittites, etc., coming to try and invade and take over Egypt and all that they have, right? Because it was very fertile, very plentiful, right? So they forewarned them and sent their armies out to drive them back before they got any further. So yeah, you had to go through this long passage. Like it's like a, when you go in a motorway and you go into the tunnel, it's like that, but up that top, right? Either side, like it's desert, right? So yeah, that kept them pretty safe. Okay. The dangers of the desert might indeed be avoided by following this course of the Nile, but the distance was under such circumstances very considerable, increased the march from Meroe to Sain being augmented from one of 450 to one of 850 miles. Or, as we said, it was like could be like a passage, right? With deserts on either desert hills, mountains, whatever on either side, or it could have just been a flat plain, for miles and miles and miles. Could have been like that. It's an alternative. Hence, the ordinary route followed was that across the Nubian desert, a distance of not less than 10 days' march for an army, and thus practically it may be said that a barrier difficult to surmount protected Egypt on the south and rendered her, unless upon rare occasions, secure from attack on that side. So there you go. The vast tract known to the ancients vaguely as Libya and inhabited by Libyans extended from the Delta and the Nile Valley between valley westward across the entire continent, comprehending all North Africa west of Egypt, excepting the small Greek settlements of Cyrene and Barca, and the Phoenician ones of Carthage, Utica and Hippo. And apparently there was white Libyans in those days. We've come across that in the histories. The geographical area was enormous, but the inhospitable nature of the region, which is for the most part an arid, it's very, very hot, and unproductive desert, very, very dry. Nothing grows there much. Through dotted with palm-bearing oases, because that's probably the plural of an oasis, which is singular, rendering it in the main unfit for the habitation of man, and kept the scattered tribes that wandered over its surface from multiplying. There's just nothing there, you die off. The portion of North Africa which borders on Egypt is particularly sterile and unattractive. A scant and sparse population can alone contrive and find subsistence amid its parched and barren waste. And this population, engaged in a perpetual struggle for existence, is naturally broken up into tribes which regard each other with animosity. They're like suspicious of each other. It's like, yeah, I don't trust these fellows, and live in a state of constant war, rapine, and mutual injury. So this basically is saying they weren't civil. They weren't civilized. They weren't a civilization, because they're at each other, fighting each other.